Good evening. Tonight I'm going to read to you about the California Gold Rush. Hopefully it will help you fall asleep. On March 9th, 1842, gold was discovered in California at Rancho San Francisco in the mountains north of present-day Los Angeles. California native Francisco Lopez was searching for stray horses and stopped at the bank of a small creek in today's Placerita Canyon, about 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, east of present-day Newhall, California, and about 35 miles, 56 kilometers, northwest of LA. While the horses grazed, Lopez dug up some wild onions and found a small gold nugget in the roots among the bulbs. He looked further and found more gold. Lopez took the gold to authorities, who confirmed its worth. Lopez and others began to search for other stream beds with gold deposits in the area. They found several in the northeastern section of the forest, within present-day Ventura County. In November, some of the gold was sent to the U.S. Mint, although otherwise attracted little notice. In 1843, Lopez found gold in San Feliciano Canyon, near his first discovery. Mexican miners from Sonora worked the placer deposits until 1846. Minor finds of gold in California were also made by Mission Indians prior to 1848. The friars instructed them to keep its location secret to avoid a gold rush. Marshall's discovery. In January 1847, 9 months into the Mexican-American War, the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed, leading to the resolution of the military conflict in Alta California. On January 24, 1848, James W. Marshall found shiny metal in the tail race of a lumber mill he was building for Sacramento pioneer John Sutter, known as Sutter's Mill, near Coloma on the American River. Marshall brought what he found to Sutter, and the two privately tested the metal. After the test showed that it was gold, Sutter expressed dismay, wanting to keep the news quiet because he feared what would happen to his plans for an agricultural empire if there were a gold rush in the region. The Mexican-American War ended on February 2nd with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which formally transferred California to the United States. Having sworn all concerned at the mill to secrecy, in February 1848, Sutter sent Charles Bennett to Monterey to meet with Colonel Mason, the chief U.S. official in California, to secure the mineral rights of the land where the mill stood. Bennett was not to tell anyone of the discovery of gold, but when he stopped at Benicia, he heard talk about the discovery of coal near Mount Diablo, and he blurted out the discovery of gold. He continued to San Francisco, where again he could not keep the secret. At Monterey, Mason declined to make any judgment of title to lands and mineral rights, and Bennett for the 3rd time revealed the gold discovery. In March 1848, rumors of the discovery were confirmed by San Francisco newspaper publisher and merchant Samuel Brannan. Brannan hurriedly set up a store to sell gold prospecting supplies, and he walked through the streets of San Francisco, holding aloft a vial of gold and shouting, "Gold, gold, gold," from the American River. On August 19th, 1848, the New York Herald was the first major newspaper on the East Coast to report the discovery of gold. On December 5th, 1848, U.S. President James K. Polk confirmed the discovery of gold in an address to the Congress. As a result, individuals seeking to benefit from the gold rush, later called the 49ers, began moving to the gold country of California, or mother lode, from other countries and from other parts of the United States. As Sutter had feared, his business plans were ruined after his workers left in search of gold, and squatters took over his land and stole his crops and cattle. San Francisco had been a tiny settlement before the gold rush began. When residents learned about the discovery, it at first became a ghost town of abandoned ships and businesses, but then boomed as merchants and new people arrived. The population of San Francisco increased quickly from about 1,000 in 1848 to 25,000 full-time residents by 1850. Miners lived in tents, wood shanties, or deck cabins removed from abandoned ships. Transportation and supplies. In what has been referred to as the first world-class gold rush, there was no easy way to get to California. 49ers faced hardship and often death on the way. At first, most Argonauts, as they were also known, traveled by sea. From the East Coast, a sailing voyage around the tip of South America would take 4 to 5 months and cover approximately 18,000 nautical miles, which is 21,000 miles or 33,000 kilometers. An alternative was to sail to the Atlantic side of the Isthmus of Panama, take canoes and mules for a week through the jungle, and then on the Pacific side, wait for ship sailing for San Francisco. There was also a route across Mexico, starting at Veracruz. The companies providing such transportation created vast wealth among their owners, and included the U.S. Mail Steamship Company, the federally subsidized Pacific Mail Steamship Company, and the Accessory Transit Company. Many gold seekers took the overland route across the continental United States, particularly along the California Trail. Each of these routes had its own deadly hazards, from shipwreck to typhoid fever and cholera. In the early years of the rush, much of the population growth in San Francisco area was due to steamship travel from New York City through overland portages in Nicaragua and Panama, and then back up by steamship to San Francisco. While traveling, many steamships from the eastern seaboard required the passengers to bring kits, which were typically full of personal belongings, such as clothes, guidebooks, tools, etc. In addition to personal belongings, Argonauts were required to bring barrels full of beef, biscuits, butter, pork, rice, and salt. While on the steamships, travelers could talk to each other, smoke, fish, and other activities depending on the ship they traveled. Still, the dominant activity held throughout the steamships was gambling, which was ironic because segregation between wealth gaps was prominent throughout the ships. Everything was segregated between the rich and the poor. There were different levels of travel one could pay for to get to California. The cheaper steamships tended to have longer routes. In contrast, the more expensive would get passengers to California quicker. There were clear social and economic distinctions between those who traveled together, being that those who spent more money would receive accommodations that others were not allowed. They would do this with the clear intent to distinguish their higher class power over those that could not afford those accommodations. Supply ships arrived in San Francisco with goods to supply the needs of the growing population. When hundreds of ships were abandoned after their crews deserted to go into the gold fields, many ships were converted to warehouses, stores, taverns, hotels, and one into a jail. As the city expanded and new places were needed on which to build, many ships were destroyed and used as landfill. In 1850 to 1851, merchant ships filled San Francisco Bay. Within a few years, there was an important but lesser-known surge of prospectors into far northern California, specifically into present-day Siskiyou, Shasta, and Trinity counties. Discovery of gold nuggets at the site of present-day Eureka in 1851 brought thousands of gold seekers up the Siskiyou Trail and throughout California's northern counties. Settlements of the Gold Rush era, such as the Portuguese Flat and the Sacramento River, sprang into existence and then faded. The Gold Rush town of Weaverville on the Trinity River today retains the oldest continuously used Taoist temple in California, a legacy of Chinese miners who came. While there are not many Gold Rush era ghost towns still in existence, the remains of the once bustling town of Shasta have been preserved in a California State Historic Park in Northern California. By 1850, most of the easily accessible gold had been collected, and attention turned to extracting gold from more difficult locations. Faced with gold increasingly difficult to retrieve, Americans began to drive out foreigners to get at the most accessible gold that remained. The new California state legislature passed a foreign miner tax of $20 per month, which would equal to $650 per month as of 2022, and American prospectors began organized attacks on foreign miners, particularly Latin Americans and Chinese. In addition, the huge number of newcomers were driving Native Americans out of their traditional hunting, fishing, and food-gathering areas. The 49ers. The first people to rush to the goldfields, beginning in the spring of 1848, were the residents of California themselves, primarily agriculturally oriented Americans and Europeans living in Northern California, along with the native Californians and some Californios, Spanish-speaking Californians, at the time commonly referred to in English as simply Californians. These first miners tended to be families in which everyone helped in the effort. Women and children of all ethnicities were often found panning next to the men. Women and children of all ethnicities were often found panning next to the men. Some enterprising families set up boarding houses to accommodate the influx of men. In such cases, the women often brought in steady income while their husbands searched for gold. Word of the gold rush spread slowly at first. The earliest gold seekers were people who lived near California, or people who heard the news from ships on the fastest sailing routes from California. The first large group of Americans to arrive were several thousand Oregonians, who came down from Siskiyou Trail. Next came people from the Sandwich Islands, and several thousand Latin Americans, including people from Mexico, from Peru, and from as far away as Chile, both by ship and overland. By the end of 1848, some 6,000 Argonauts had come to California. Only a small number, probably fewer than 500, traveled overland from the United States that year. Some of these 48ers, as the earliest gold seekers were sometimes called, were able to collect large amounts of easily accessible gold, in some cases thousands of dollars worth each day. Even ordinary prospectors averaged daily gold finds worth 10 to 15 times the daily wage of a laborer on the East Coast. A person could work for 6 months in the gold fields and find the equivalent of 6 years' wages back home. Some hoped to get rich quick and return home, and others wished to start businesses in California. By the beginning of 1849, word of the gold rush had spread around the world, and an overwhelming number of gold seekers and merchants began to arrive from virtually every continent. The largest group of 49ers in 1849 were Americans, arriving by the tens of thousands overland, across the continent, and along various sailing routes. Many from the east coast negotiated a crossing of the Appalachian Mountains, taking to riverboats in Pennsylvania, poling the keeled boats to Missouri River, wagon train in assembly ports, and then traveling in a wagon train along the California Trail. Many others came by the way of the Isthmus of Panama and the steamships of the Pacific Mail Steamship Company. Australians and New Zealanders picked up the news from ships carrying Hawaiian newspapers, and thousands, infected with gold fever, boarded ships for California. 49ers came from Latin America, particularly from the Mexican mining districts near Sonora in Chile. Gold seekers and merchants from Asia, primarily from China, began arriving in 1849. At first in modest numbers, to Gum Sun or Gold Mountain, the name given to California in Chinese. The first immigrants from Europe, reeling from the effects of the Revolution of 1848, and with a longer distance to travel, began arriving in 1849, mostly from France, with some Germans, Italians, and Britons. It is estimated that approximately 90,000 people arrived in California in 1849, about half by land and half by sea. Of these, perhaps 50 to 60,000 were Americans, and the rest were from other countries around the world. By 1855, it is estimated at least 300,000 gold seekers, merchants, and other immigrants had arrived in California from around the world. The largest group continued to be Americans, but there were tens of thousands each of Mexicans, Chinese, Brits, Australians, French, and Latin Americans, together with many smaller groups of miners, such as African Americans, Filipinos, Basques, and Turks. People from small villages in the hills near Geneva, Italy, were among the first to settle permanently in the Sierra Nevada foothills. They brought with them traditional agricultural skills, developed to survive cold winters. A modest number of miners of African ancestry, probably less than 4,000, had come from the southern states, the Caribbean, and Brazil. A number of immigrants were from China. Several hundred Chinese arrived in California in 1849 and 1850, and in 1852 more than 20,000 landed in San Francisco. Their distinctive dress and appearance was highly recognizable in the gold fields. Chinese miners suffered enormously, enduring violent racism from white miners, who aimed their frustrations at foreigners. Further animosity towards the Chinese, led by legislations such as the Chinese Exclusion Act and Foreign Miners' Tax. There were also women in the gold rush. However, their numbers were small. Of the 40,000 people who arrived by ship to the San Francisco Bay in 1849, only 700 were women, including those who were poor, wealthy, entrepreneurs, prostitutes, single and married. They were of various ethnicities, including Anglo-American, African-American, Hispanic, Native, European, Chinese, and Jewish. The reasons they came varied. Some came with the husbands, refusing to be left behind to defend for themselves. Some came because their husbands sent for them, and others, singles and widows, came for the adventure and economic opportunities. On the trail, many people died from accidents and fever, and many women became widows before even setting eyes in California. While in California, women became widows quite frequently due to mining accidents and diseases. Life in the goldfields offered opportunities for women to break from traditional work.